Now let's take this application to the next level. I want to add a delete button next to each counter. So here in our counter component, in the render method, right after our increment button, I want to add a new button. So a button with a few classes, btn, btn-danger to make it red, btn-sm to make it small, and m-2 to add a bit of margin around this button and the increment button. Now let's type the label, delete, save the changes, back in the browser. Here's our delete button, beautiful. Now let's handle the click event. So here we want to add onClick and set it to a method in this class, like this, that handle delete. However, if you look at the state of this component, you can see in this state object, we only have the value property. But in order to delete a counter, we need to delete it from this array of counters that we have in the counters component. And this brings us to a very important rule of thumb in React applications. The component that owns a piece of the state should be the one modifying it. In this particular example, this piece of the state, that is the list of counters, is part of the counters component. So modifying the state should be done by this component itself. Adding a new counter to this array or removing an existing one should be done inside of this component. Now, in the last lecture, you learned that the state is something private and internal to a component. It's not visible to the outside. So you might be wondering, how can we modify this state from the counter component? Because this is where we have placed our delete button. To solve this problem, we should modify our counter component to raise an event. We're going to call that event onDelete. So our components can raise events, and this is the naming convention we use to name those events. So the counter component will raise this event, and our counters component will handle this event. In other words, we should implement the handle delete method in the counters component, not the counter component. This concept of raising and handling events is something that you see in a lot of libraries for building user interfaces. It's not specific to React. Now let me show you how to implement this concept in React. Basically, we need to add a new method to our counters component and pass a reference to that method via props to the counter component. So here in the counters component, let's add a new method, handle delete. This is our event handler. Here, let's do a simple console.log event handler called. Now we want to pass a reference to this function using props to our child component, that is our counter component. So earlier we passed a couple of props here, value and ID. Now we can pass another prop. We're going to call that prop based on the name of our event. So the name of our event is onDelete. We're going to set this to this.handle delete. So now that we're passing a reference to this function to our child component, let's go to our child component and modify this onClick expression. So instead of referencing this.handle delete, which does not exist in this component, we want to reference this.props.onDelete, because that's the name of our prop, right? Save the changes, back in the browser. Here with the React tab open, let's look at one of our counters, look at the props. Now we have a new prop, onDelete, which is a function. So let's go to the console tab, click this button, we get the message event handler clicked. So in this implementation, our counter component is raising an event and its parent, that is counters component, is handling that event. This is a very common pattern that you see in a lot of real-world applications. And you're going to see several more examples of this throughout the course. But we are not done yet, because in our handle delete method, we're simply doing a console.log. Here we need to update the state, and that's what we're going to do next.